All right, so we're going to finish up this lesson. I'm going to skip number 11 because, again, it is very similar to those examples that we just did. You just have to sketch out that one to find your y value. It gives you your radius, and it gives you, no, it gives you the y, it gives you radius. You have to find the x. So, same idea. But let's look at 12 and... I thought we had 12 and 13. Maybe it's just number 12. Number 12, it says given secant. And secant is equal to 41 over 40 for theta in quadrant 4. It says use fundamental identities to find tan theta and sine theta. So we're using those fundamental identities. And I think they were provided... we have some identities right here, so I'm pretty sure those are all the identities that we would need for this one. But I do know, I think I remember in the last section, there was a chart there, and I think it had a few more identities, so those might be helpful as well to have those handy. But here's what we know. Let's look up top. They're asking me, given secant, I want to find tan and sine. Okay, so let's start with tan. So if I want to find tan and I'm given secant, that means that I probably need to use one of those identities up there that relates secant squared or secant to tan. And what I see is that I do have a relationship between tan and secant right there. I know that tan squared theta plus 1 is equal to secant squared theta. So let's take what I have and substitute that into that function. I don't know what tan is just yet, so I'm going to leave that the way it is, but I do know that secant is equal to 41 over 40, but this is actually secant squared, correct? So we're going to square that. That leaves me with tan squared theta plus 1 is equal to, I think that that should give us that 1681 divided by 1600. What we want to do is move that 1 to the other side of that equal sign, and that would give me that tan squared theta is equal to, if I subtract 1 from 1681 over 1600, that would give me that 81 over 100. And of course, this is tan squared theta. So what we want is tan. We want tan, not tan squared. So what we're going to do is take the square root of both sides, and that leaves me with tan theta is equal to a positive and negative 9 over 40. So now here's the thing. If I go back, let me go back and as a little reminder, if I were to draw my quadrant planes, I think the way we said this was that all students take calculus. And what they want is they want us to find tan in the fourth quadrant. So in the fourth quadrant, the only identity that is positive is cosine. So in the fourth quadrant, what that tells me is that tan is negative in the fourth quadrant. So while the square root of tan gives me a positive and negative solution, because I'm looking for the tan that falls within the fourth quadrant, I have to choose the one that is negative. So for this particular problem, I know that tan theta is negative 9 over 40 because of the quadrant that we fall in. Okay? So that's that. Now, I want to find, what's the second piece here? I want to find sine. Well, how can I do this? Well, what I know, let's write down what we know. I know that secant theta, which was given to me, is 41 over 40. Okay? But then I also know that secant theta is equal to 1 over cosine theta. And the reason we're going here is because if I can relate secant to cosine, I know that cosine and sine, there's a relationship there. There is a relationship between sine and cosine. I know that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So if I can write secant in terms of cosine, then I can remove the secant piece. Now secant becomes cosine. So the only unknown piece that I have there is the sine part, which I can find, if that makes sense. So because secant is 1 over cosine theta, I can also, I don't have room over there, let's come back over here. I can say that 1 over cosine theta is going to be the inverse. Remember, they're reciprocals. If secant is 41 over 40, then that means that cosine, which is my secant. Okay, so let me write it this way. Since I have it written down as 1 over cosine theta, that is really 1 over 40 because we know that that is secant theta. So secant theta is 1 over cosine theta, which is 41 over 40. But this tells me that my cosine, so the reciprocal of that, would be 40 over 41. I hope you guys can follow that. I can hear myself, and it sounds like I said a whole lot there. But remember, they are reciprocal. That's so that's how they're related to one another. So given that, now that I have secant written in terms of cosine, I can now come down here and write that sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to 1. And I have what cosine is, so let's substitute that in. So I have sine squared theta plus my cosine is 40 over 41, but that is cosine squared. And so that's going to be equal to 1. If I square that, let's do this all in one step because I feel like I'm talking a lot and this video is going to be super long. So if I bring that across the equal sign and go ahead and subtract that in one step, what I'm left with is sine squared theta is equal to 1 minus, then I have 1600 divided by 1681. And if I subtract that, simplify this, just stick that in your calculator. If I do that, then what I'm left with is sine squared theta is equal to, if I subtract that, that should give us 81 over 1681. And just as we did earlier, I don't want to know what sine squared is. I want simply sine. So then we can take the square root of both sides. And what that gives me is sine theta is equal to positive and negative 9 over 41. But then remember over here where I said all students take calculus. If you remember, all three ratios are positive in the first quadrant. Sine is negative in the second, or positive in the second. Tan is positive down here, and only cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant. And remember, we're focusing on the fourth quadrant. Sine is not positive down there, not in the fourth quadrant. It's only positive up there in the second quadrant. So that tells me that I cannot consider that positive 941 as my answer. So that tells me that my answer, can I move this? Go away so I have more room. It's not going to go away. So this tells me, let's write the answer over here, that for sine, I'm putting it in blue, so sine theta, the answer that we're going to consider in the fourth quadrant is that sine theta is going to be equal to negative 9 over 41.